This is a review of the DKST top-of-the-line cookie press, made of stainless steel and comes with everything you see here, plus a few things that are off to the side there. The main barrel of the press, the lever to operate it, frosting tips for doing things like deviled eggs and frosting and decorations. Comes with a very limited instruction book, shows you the 25 different discs you can use for the press and what the cookies would look like for those tips. Here are the discs themselves. As you can see, it's a fairly wide variety. This is one of the things that differentiates this cookie press, is that there are over 24 of those discs. That's double what most cookie presses provide, just as this many frosting tips is double or even triple what most cookie presses provide. This is a moderately expensive set. However, given everything you see and the quality of the manufacturer, if it makes cookies as well as I hope it does, then I would say that this is worth the price because you're buying something that will last you for years. I wanted to show you one reason why you don't get the cheap ones. Now, this was a set that I bought some time ago, and as you can see, the stamping of the cutout is off-center, and what that meant for in my case was that the dough tended to, if I used this particular pattern, the dough tended to stick over here because it was all basically pressing against the bottom of the cylinder. So providing something where you can see the quality of the cutouts and that they are centered and they don't have anything off-center and nothing cheaply made. Again, you're paying for it, but you're getting the quality that makes a difference. One other thing two things that I noticed immediately when I got this. One is that some of the cookie presses, the ratcheting cookie presses made today, basically operate on a squeeze approach where you actually have two handles and you squeeze them together to operate the ratchet. That's fine for most people. However, if you have arthritis in your hands, then something like that is going to be problematic for you because you don't have the grip that you used to have when you were younger. This one operates simply by pressing down. And that is easy enough for all of us to operate. To basically operate this, you would turn this enough so the ratchet doesn't engage, and then lift the piston. I'm going to have to show you this with the camera on a tripod because it's a little difficult to do all of this one-handed. As you can see, I've extended the piston, and you can see the ratcheting there, and that is the thing that operates this and makes this work. There's also a regulator on here which allows you to control the thickness of the cookie you make. That's something that, again, not all of these cookie presses offer, and it'll be interesting just for me to see how that works in practice because I've never used that before. But basically all you have to do once you've got that fully extended and you've got your dough in that cylinder is basically press down. And you can hear the ratchet each time. You can hear that little click that tells you it's operating. Alright, next step is let's make some cookies and put them in there, and I'll give you a few tips along the way. This is going to be an interesting test for me. I have never used a cookie press to actually do any frosting, but I was temptation with those 8 tips to try it out. So basically you can see there that I've got the 8 tips, and the way this works is that you take a tip and you put it onto the platform, and you put that on top and turn it so that it locks it into place, and then you put that in your cookie press cylinder. I've got a batch of buttercream frosting made there, just a classic butter, powdered sugar, a little vanilla, a little salt, a little milk. I'm going to fill the cylinder, and we're going to test out the tips. Now in this case I don't have a cake ready to go, and in fact I've not done any serious cake decorating. So I've got a wax paper there, and I'm just going to put a stream of frosting out on the wax paper, use maybe 3 or 4 of those tips, show you what it looks like, and give you my impression as to how easy or difficult it is. As you can see, I've done 3 lines of frosting. It actually proved both easier and harder than I thought it might be. Easier because the frosting came out better than I expected. I didn't have as much trouble as I thought I would. A little bit more difficult because the fine control isn't there. If I'm doing something that fits easily into one click of the lever, then I think with practice I would have no problem. Let's say I'm doing a single flower that can be handled with just this one small chunk of frosting, then it'd be no problem at all. But if I do something like a long line, well, right now I'm out of frosting, it's difficult for me to keep that line straight and not show that I just had to do a new click of the lever. I think this is something that would get easier with practice, and certainly if I were more experienced at cake decorating, then I think that this is something I could handle. I suspect if you really are good at cake decorating, however, you're probably going to want the traditional tips like the Wilton tips and something like a parchment bag or something that gives you the finer control, and you actually can completely control that and drawing as long a line as you want. Still, for somebody like me, for getting a cupcake that looks a little bit more professional, or just drawing a little bit of curly cues on top of a regular cake, I can absolutely see myself doing this, and this worked to my satisfaction. So I'm very pleased with that overall. In the background there, in the mixing bowl, I've mixed up a batch of spritz cookies using a regular recipe that I've had in my family for years. Nothing special about it, just butter, sugar, eggs, flour, a little flavoring, a little salt. I'm going to use the cookie press and a couple of randomly selected discs to make the cookies. It's pretty straightforward, anybody can do it. You take a disc, you put it inside the bottom of the cylinder here, put that on. Now the cylinder here is a little bit narrower than the one that I'm accustomed to using, so it takes a little bit more effort to scrunch the dough up small enough that it'll fit inside, but you don't really have to be all that careful. The more you can pack it down, the better, as in that you want the air bubbles out of that, but I find that that usually takes care of itself just by the action of the piston over time as I make the cookies. So we'll get this in here, tamp it down just a little bit. Doesn't need to be completely full. It doesn't hurt to have it completely full. It just really depends upon what you want to do. I think that's fine. Then we simply put the cover back on and we can start cranking out cookies. As you can see, I already have the first several cookies on the sheet. I wanted to make sure that I didn't totally humiliate myself on camera. And as you can see, this is working pretty straightforwardly. You just put the crank down. The one thing that I'm having a little trouble with is I tend to use a little bit too much dough, and sometimes less is better. You want these cookies to be a little delicate, I think, not quite as thick as some of these that I'm making. However, this is just something that's going to take a little practice. This is a slightly different set than I'm used to. On the other hand, as you can see, this actually cranked out a lot of cookies in a very short period of time. And as you can see, now that these are cooked, we have an assortment of shapes. Not as uniform as I would like, but I think this is not the fault of the cookie press. This is just a new cookie press for me. And I found that as the more I did it, the easier it got, and I would expect that over time this will get to be second nature, just as the one I've been using for 25 years. Those are a little bit plain, so I jazz these up again with a little bit of colored sugar. You can frost these cookies, although frankly I wouldn't recommend it. That's a little overkill, but it's up to you. I definitely find using candied cherries, for example, candied fruit of some kind, colored sugars, nonpareils, can really spice this up. If this were Christmas, for example, I'd take that Christmas tree and I would definitely be dyeing the dough green, and would definitely have something to indicate colored sugars or something to indicate a decorated Christmas tree. Overall, this is, I think the learning curve on this one is less steep than the one, if my memory serves me correctly, from the one I got 25 years ago. And I did find that it's faster than the one I was using just a couple of weeks ago. So I'm very pleased with it so far. A couple more things I want to test, and then we'll bring this video to a close. This is something I've never tried before. For some reason, this has just never entered my lexicon of things that I cook or things that I have seen at other people's houses. I've been told that this is a southern delicacy. These are cheese straws. And I'm using the recipe that I found on the DKST Kitchen site. As you can see, I'm using the star disc, and basically extruding these as if I were extruding frosting. And like frosting, as you can see, it's a little hard to make an uninterrupted straight line. However, unlike frosting, these can be patched. So I can tie these together, I can put these in a nice little line, and I can correct my flaws after I put them out. And of course, these are intended to be cut into smaller pieces anyway, so I don't think it matters that much. This will be an interesting experiment. I'm curious to see what these taste like. And as you can see, this isn't quite as simple as, say, putting out a single cookie. On the other hand, it's not that complicated. Sorry, this is probably as much my klutziness as it is any problems with the process. Like anything else, I'll get better with practice. As you can see, I've now got a nice batch of cheese straws. This is the recipe that I found on the manufacturer's website. Actually, this is a half recipe. So if you're just making for you and a few members of your family, I'd recommend the half recipe. Otherwise, unless you're going for a large party, in which case, of course, go for the full recipe. I found them to be pretty easy to make. The one thing that I did, you can see underneath here, some of them are a little darker. I was thinking I want them a little crispier because I just like crispier things. What I found is they crisp up a bit as they cool, so that you don't necessarily need to have them darker and crisper right out of the oven. In fact, I would say that this last batch or so is probably about what I would do it. Of course, you may be laughing at me because you've made cheese straws all your life and these don't look anything like what you're doing, but hey, this is a first time. Final summing up is a little bit difficult. You've seen it now being used to make cookies, to make cheese straws, used to spread some frosting. Clearly, it is a well-made instrument with a lot of options, more so than any other cookie press out there that I'm aware of. So it is sort of the Mercedes-Benz of cookie presses. Admittedly, though, it is priced accordingly. If you don't need all these extra capabilities, then you probably want to buy one of the cheaper models, and that's fine. The one complaint I do have about this is the regulator. So that was that little knob on the side that allows you to control a little bit the flow of the dough. I had two problems with it. And the first problem was it didn't really seem to be having much of an impact as far as I could tell. I've got a request into the manufacturer about that. I haven't heard back yet. And the second is that ultimately I ended up having a real problem with it. So the regulator is on top, or supposed to be on top of this cap to the cookie press. And what happened, and I still don't know exactly how I accomplished it, somehow I got the regulator, the edge of the regulator stuck under the cap. And once that happened, I'm in real trouble because now I can't figure out how to get the cap back on properly and the regulator out from the inside of that cap. So I'm sitting there looking at this going, now what do I do? I tried some time to deal with it, ultimately ended up just breaking the regulator off. That to me isn't quite as big a deal as it sounds because, as I said, I wouldn't really find it all that useful. And honestly, I just rather control this myself. And I found that once I got into the rhythm of just stamping the cookies out as I go, I didn't really need the regulator. And you certainly don't need it for things like the cheese straws or the frosting or for things that where you're extruding a large quantity. So ultimately, I'll take a star away because of the problems with the regulator. But personally, I actually kind of like having it off. It's easier to clean the cookie press, and as I said, I didn't find it that useful. Overall, aside from that one problem, and as I said, I've got a query out to the owner, the seller of this, to ask about this, I really did like this. This is my first exposure to using a cookie press of this type. I found it to be very easy. I love the options. I love the quality of this other than the regulator. I found it very easy to use, easy to clean. And I really liked the overall quality. I love the case. There's just a lot to like about this. The one thing I didn't was the regulator. I'm going to dock the seller a star for that. Otherwise, I really do like it. It is, again, the Mercedes-Benz of these things. If you don't need that, And hey, go for one of the cheaper models, maybe the Good Grips version. But if you really want all of these options, if you really want the top quality and you're willing to pay for it, then I can recommend this. It really is that solid, that well made, and with that many options.